I am Josiah Hilbig. I am 22 years old. I am a theology student. I am a Sabbath school teacher at this church and a Sunday school teacher at another church. And I am talking to you today about Moses. You've heard the recap. If you're paying attention, you'll know that Moses was a Hebrew born into Egypt at a time when the Hebrews were slaves. He was adopted into the royal family and grew up in the palace. Of course, when he grew up, he learned that he was a Hebrew. He grew up knowing that. And at a time when he was 40 years old, he saw that the Egyptians were persecuting the Hebrews. And in a fit of rage, he actually murdered one of these slave drivers. And so he ran away as a fugitive from Pharaoh into the desert until he found the land of Midian. He married a priest's daughter, a Midianite, settled down, raised a family, keeping the flocks of his father-in-law. He lived a full life in Midian, and at the age of 80, God visited him and asked him to free the oppressed Hebrew people from Egypt, which is where we pick up the story in Exodus 3. Now Moses was keeping the flocks of his father-in-law Jethro, the priest of Midian. And he led his flock to the west side of the wilderness and came to Horeb, the mountain of God. And the angel of the Lord appeared to him in a flame of fire out of the midst of a bush. He looked, and behold, the bush was burning, yet it was not consumed. And Moses said, I will turn aside to see this great sight. Why is the bush not burned? When the Lord saw that he turned aside to see, God called to him out of the bush, Moses, Moses. And he said, Here I am. Then he said, Do not come near. Take your sandals off your feet, for the place on which you are standing is holy ground. And he said, I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. And Moses hid his face, for he was afraid to look at God. Then the Lord said, I have surely seen this affliction of my people who are in Egypt, and have heard their cry because of their taskmasters. I know their sufferings, and I have come down to deliver them out of the hands of the Egyptians, and to bring them to a land that is good and a broad land, a land flowing with milk and honey, to the place of the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Amorites, the Perizzites, the Hivites, and the Jebusites. And now, behold, the cry of the people of Israel has come to me, and I have also seen the oppression with which the Egyptians oppress them. Come, I will send you to Egypt, that you may I will send you to Pharaoh, that you may bring my people, the children of Israel, out of Egypt. But God said to Moses, Who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and bring the children out of Egypt? He said, But I will be with you, and this will be the sign for you, that I have sent you. When you have brought the people out of Egypt, you shall serve God on this mountain. Then Moses said to God, If I come to the people of Israel and say to them, The God of your fathers has sent me to you, and they ask me, What is his name? What shall I say to them? God said to Moses, I am who I am. And he said, Say this to the people of Israel, I am has sent me to you. God also said to Moses, Say this to the people of Israel, The Lord, the God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob, has sent me to you. This is my name forever, and thus I am to be remembered throughout all generations. After this passage, Moses did some more whining. God got angry with him, and then eventually they worked out their differences. Moses met up with his brother Aaron, who did all the talking for Moses, since Moses was, in his words, slow of speech. They went before Pharaoh and asked him to free the Hebrews, and Pharaoh said no. So God sent a multitude of plagues upon Egypt. But it wasn't until God killed the firstborn children of the Egyptian families and passed over the houses of the Hebrews that Pharaoh decided to give up and let the Hebrews go free. By the way, that's where we get the term Passover. Passover is a celebration of the day where the wrath of God passed over the houses of Hebrews and spared them. So Moses takes the Israelites to the Red Sea. God parts the waters and allows them to walk across the seabed, and they establish the nation of Israel on the other side. If you'd like the longer version of the story, you can read about it in the Bible, in the entirety of the Old Testament. It's a pretty long story. But back to Exodus 3. At the end of this passage, God explains three things to Moses that establish God's character in relation to us. First up, I will be with you. God goes on this whole spiel about how he's going to free the Hebrews and take them to a new land, a broad land that's flowing with milk and honey. And Moses says, Who am I to do what you have asked? Who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and bring the children of Israel out of Egypt? And what does God say to that? He says, That's not right. He says, but I will be with you. You can almost hear confusion in those words. Moses says, who am I to go before Pharaoh? And God's like, but I will be with you. I love how dismissive God is in that moment. Moses has so much doubt right off the bat, and God just says, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter who you are. If God has chosen someone to be his instrument, does it really matter who he's chosen? It is an interesting response, though. Isn't it interesting that rather than doubt God's powers, Moses doubts his own? He makes the mistake of thinking that he's in control. So when he considers whether or not he can do what God asks, he has doubts. Not about God, but about himself. I think we should all be careful of the same mistake. We may think that God is the biggest hindrance to our lives. We may think that doubting God is the biggest hindrance to our lives and the calling of God in our lives. But I would suggest that just like Moses, we make an even bigger mistake by considering our own abilities. Next time you feel God asking you to step out of your comfort zone and you think to doubt yourself and wonder, who am I to do what God has asked? Just remember that Moses was an 80-year-old murderer on the run with a stutter. So, maybe Moses shouldn't have doubted his own abilities because God is with him. But Moses definitely had a right to doubt his identity. He's a Hebrew by birth, but he was raised by an Egyptian royal family. He's royalty, but he's also wanted for murder, or at least he was before he ran away and married a Midianite. He has a wife and family now, but is he a Hebrew? Is he Egyptian? Is he a Midianite? Is he noble or common? It's interesting that the Bible notes he spent 40 years in Egypt and then 40 years in Midian. He spent as much time building his new life as he spent building his old life, and it's now that God decides to call him out to face his past. This sentiment is reflected in The Lion King, which I'm going to use for a couple of illustrations. For anyone who hasn't seen The Lion King, it's an animated movie about anthropomorphic animals living in the African plains. And it tells a story inspired by Shakespeare's Hamlet and the biblical stories of Joseph and Moses. In particular, there's a scene where the protagonist, Simba, the heir to the throne, is confronted with his own past after running away from home because he's accused of murder. Sound familiar? Let's have a look at Simba's story. Some pretty strong biblical connotations there. Remember who you are my son. When Simba meets Rafiki, he's struggling with his own identity. He admits to the monkey, I thought I knew, now I'm not so sure. And what does Rafiki say? You're Mufasa's boy. Rafiki shows Simba his father in his own reflection, and then Mufasa asks Simba to look inside himself. Over and over, his identity is reinforced in the identity of his father. It's the very thing that encourages Simba to go back home and face his past. This is doubly important because Simba is an heir to the throne. His identity belongs to his father and his father before him because he's royal, because that bloodline is royalty. Simba's identity is royal because he's the child of the king, much like we, as the children of God, are, or the Hebrews, as the children of Israel were. But Moses didn't know that. He didn't know God. He said, if I come to the people of Israel and say to them, the God of your fathers has sent me to you, and they ask me, what is his name? What shall I say to them? God said to Moses, I am who I am. And he said, say this to the people of Israel, I am has sent me to you. Now, what does that mean? That's a very long and complex answer. One of the reasons Moses may have asked for God's name is because there were so many ancient Egyptian deities, and they all had names. Ra, Geb, Khepri, Serket, Anubis, Osiris, Sekhmet. There were hundreds, if not thousands of them. That's what Moses had grown up learning, that each god has a name. So Moses, confronted with the God of the Hebrews, asks for a name. And God's response suggests that he is above names. He's above human understanding, so to even try to describe God with a single name is impossible, at least not one that we would understand. He simply says, I am who I am. In the original Hebrew, that is written as Ea Asher Ea. Ea is the first person, singular, I, imperfect verb form, am, or shall be, or will be. The meaning of this verse is a highly debated topic, and no one has all the answers. But if there's one thing I know, it's that when you say, I am, the thing that follows is a statement about your identity. When you say, I am, the thing that follows is a statement about your identity. So when God says, I am who I am, he's making a statement about his identity. I started the sermon off with a series of I am statements. I am Josiah. I am 22. I am a theology student, etc. Our entire identity can be summed up with a series of I am statements. I am a son. I am a brother. I am a man. I am a Christian. It's the answer to our names, our occupations, our family and marital status, our hobbies, our beliefs, our deepest passions. So when Moses asks who God is, and he says, skip this a bit. So when Moses says, who are you? And God says, I am who I am. He really is answering the question. He's making a statement about his identity. But more than that, God is making a statement about our identity. If our identities can be surmised by the phrase, I am, and God says to Moses that his name is I am, it's almost like he's telling Moses that his name is the very definition of identity. And I know that sounds crazy, but the fact that he then follows up with saying that he is the God of Moses' fathers, God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, it really cements the idea that God is trying to say that he is the God of identity. The God of your fathers, your ancestors, your generations, the very words you use to describe yourself. That's me. Maybe Moses understood this, maybe he didn't, but he hadn't grown up knowing who he was. Knowing that because he was a Hebrew and that this is the God of the Hebrews, that he belonged to this God. That was something Moses had to learn in this moment. Jesus expressed this better than anyone else. He had the perfect analogy for how we belong to God. Mark 12:13-17. And they sent to Jesus some of the Pharisees and some of the Herodians to trap him in his talk. And they came to him and said, Teacher, we know that you are true and do not care about anyone's opinion, for you are not swayed by appearances, but truly teach the way of God. Is it lawful to pay taxes to Caesar or not? Should we pay them or should we not? But knowing their hypocrisy, he said to them, Why put me to the test? Bring me a denarius and let me look at it. And they brought one. And he said to them, Whose likeness and inscription is this? And they said to him, Caesar's. Jesus said to them, Render to Caesar the things that are Caesar's, and to God the things that are God's. And they marveled at him. Now, this verse is obviously about paying taxes and obeying the laws of the government, but it's also about paying to God what belongs to God. Now, if the image of Caesar is what defines his ownership over the coin, where can we find the image of God? Genesis 1:27. So God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created them. Male and female, he created them. That's why God is our identity. That's why we're his children and his heirs. I love that Jesus uses the analogy that he does in that moment, because the image of God is on every single one of us, just as the image of Caesar was on the denarius. I have another clip from The Lion King I'd like to show you. Simba decides to return to his home to confront his evil, murderous uncle. Pay attention to what Simba's family sees in him. That particular clip is, it's a little more Hamlet than it is Moses, but I've always found it profound that Simba reflects the power and authority of his father Mufasa, and in doing so strikes fear into the heart of evil. That's exactly what being made in God's image means. It's also what being a Christian means. It means going in the name of God being a reflection of his character, to be his hands and feet on the earth. And that brings me to my final point, the power behind the name. God also said to Moses, "Say this to the people of Israel, the Lord, the God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob, has sent me to you. This is my name forever, and thus I am to be remembered throughout all generations." I mentioned this third section earlier. God made a deliberate effort to mention that he is the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. He does it a few times, actually. Here's what he's referencing. Genesis 17, 4-6. "Behold, my covenant is with you, and you shall be the father of a multitude of nations. No longer shall your name be called Abram, but your name shall be called Abraham, for I have made you the father of a multitude of nations. I will make you exceedingly fruitful, and I will make you into nations, and kings shall come from you." For the sake of brevity, I've read 3 verses from that passage, but in reality, the covenant that God made with Abraham fills the entirety of Genesis 17. I could spend all day talking about how God used Moses to fulfill the Abrahamic covenant and then follows up with the Mosaic covenant. But instead, I just want to talk to you about how powerful that statement actually is. Once Moses understood that he belonged to God, he was able to speak in God's name on behalf of God. There's one more video to help illustrate my point. So that clip was a little bit of a joke, but at the same time, it really is a great demonstration of how much power there is in the name of the King. How much power is there? Well, a person's name holds not only their identity and reputation, but also their authority. My name was the first thing I said in this sermon. It's the first thing I say when I introduce myself or when someone else introduces me. My name will be attached to the sermon when it's uploaded to the internet, just as the last one was. My name is at the start of every letter addressed to me and at the end of every letter I've ever sent. It's on my license, my passport, my working with children's check, my tax file number, my Facebook page. Everything. It's everywhere. Everything that represents me, everything that I own. And when I sign a contract, I sign my name, which authorizes the deal that I'm making with that contract. But in ancient days, people would swear oaths on another person's name. They would use a name greater than their own to put more authority on the agreements. So, Hebrews 6:13, 16, and 17. When God made his promise to Abraham, since there was no one greater for him to swear by, he swore by himself. People swear by someone greater than themselves, and the oath confirms what is said and puts an end to all argument. Because God wanted to make the unchanging nature of his purpose very clear to the heirs of what was promised, he confirmed it with an oath on his own name, because there is no greater name. And then he says to Moses, "This is my name, and thus I am to be remembered throughout all generations." He makes himself known to Moses as the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, to whom he swore in his own name, because there is no greater name. And then he says to Moses, "I am to be remembered throughout all generations, for this is my name." Do you know how much the Bible talks about the name of God? Joel 2:32a, "And it shall pass to come that everyone who calls on the name of the Lord shall be saved." Matthew 6:9, "Pray then like this, our Father in heaven, hallowed be your name." Philippians 2:9-11, which you may remember from the last time I spoke at this pulpit. "Therefore, God has highly exalted on him and bestowed on him the name that is above every name, so that at the name of Jesus, every knee should bow in heaven and on earth and under the earth, and every tongue confess that Jesus Christ is Lord, to the glory of God the Father." There is no greater name than God. Nothing in the world with more power and authority. When we speak in the name of God, with his authority, we call on the same power that brought plagues upon Egypt and allowed Moses to free an entire nation from slavery, allowing them to walk through the Dead Sea on dry ground and into a land established for them as the fulfillment of a prophecy he established 500 years earlier when he chose Abraham, an old and barren idol-worshipping man, and promised to make a great nation out of him. I think it speaks volumes of God that he would give us his name, that he would allow us to use the power behind his name. I work as a kitchen hand in a little barbecue place, and one day my boss asked me to go and pick up some milk crates for him. He gave me the name of the owner of the bakery and told them to give him his name, to say that Dave sent me. So I walk across the road, down the block, I go into the bakery, and I say, Dave sent me. And I give the server there the name of their boss and the name of my boss, and their boss gives them a nod, and they point me to the milk crates. Now, I couldn't have possibly made that deal with the authority of my own name. I can't just walk into the bakery and say, my name is Josiah, I would like your milk crates. They would turn me away. I had to rely on the authority of Dave's name, who had made a deal beforehand and given me the authority to use his name. This is the same thing that the disciples did. I mean, consider what God gives us. Dave's name might allow me to get milk crates from the bakery, but God's name, Matthew 11:4-6, can give sight to the blind, give movement to the lame, cleanse lepers, heal the deaf, and raise the dead. And then Jesus says in John 14:12-14 that we as Christians will do greater things than even that. Truly, truly, I say to you, whoever believes in me will also do the works that I do, and greater works than these will he do, because I am going to the Father. Whatever you ask in my name, this I will do, that the Father may be glorified in the Son. If you ask anything in my name, I will do it. Exodus 3 is the first account in the Bible of God giving his name to someone. And Moses was the first person to speak in the name of God. And now, 3,500 years later, we are asked to do the same thing, to go in the name of God into the places of evil and free the slaves, just like Moses did. That's what God means when he says, this is my name forever, and thus I am to be remembered throughout all generations. All generations, forever. You, me, the descendants to come from us. Don't think for a moment that God isn't calling each and every one of us. But who am I? Who am I to do God's works? It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter who we are. Not even if we're a wicked idol worshiper like Abraham or a murderer with a stutter like Moses. God uses the broken. Over and over and over throughout the whole Bible, God uses the kind of people that would say, who am I to do what you have asked? But God will be with us. And Romans 8:31b, if God is for us, who can be against us? God is the one who gives us purpose, strength, meaning. We are his children, his heirs. His very image is in us. Our identity doesn't come from our wealth, our possessions, our job, our talents. It doesn't even come from our family and friends. Our identity comes from God. For every I am statement I can make about my worldly self, God can make one about our holy selves. I am a disciple. I am a prophet. I am a teacher. I am a preacher. I am a leader. I am a warrior. 1 Corinthians 12:27, now you are the body of Christ and individually members of it. So, let us go from here in the name of God, secure in the promises he made all throughout the Bible. Secure in your identity as a follower of Christ. God gives us his name so that we can do his works. His name is the reason that Moses was called. God didn't call Moses because of Moses' name, and he certainly didn't call Moses because of Moses' works. He called Moses because of his name, because of God's name. Moses didn't call down the plagues on Egypt. God did. Moses didn't part the Red Sea. God did. Moses went by God's authority, speaking in the name of God. So when God asks us to do his works, we don't do so by our own abilities. We do so by the authority of the name of God. Philippians 4:13, I can do all things through him who strengthens me.